Good evening. We will start. I want to introduce Professor Roy Oseri, our Vice President for Resource Development and Public Affairs, Professor Gabi Barbasah, and Kelly Avidan. We have also the presence of our presidents of the different associations of France. In Argentina, Hugo Sigman; in Brazil, Mario Fleck; and in Mexico, Silvia Gerson. Thank you. Professor Barbasah will be the keynote speaker, and he will share with us his views on the coronavirus situation from the Israeli perspective. All the participants beside the speaker will be mute, but we will be very happy that you will ask questions. You can send questions to my email. It's the email you received from the invitation. I am sure you will find this talk informative. Now I would like to invite Professor Roy Oseri to introduce Professor Gabi Barbasah. Please, Roy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dani. Let me move in so you can see me. So yeah, good evening here, I guess. Good afternoon in the Americas. I'll move closer to Gabi. Yeah, these are complicated times for everyone in the world, as well as here at the Weizmann Institute. We're facing serious challenges. At the Institute, similar to other places in Israel, we follow government regulations, and we're slowly trying to minimize presence on campus and move much of our activity and our employees to work from home, and Gabi will explain later why we do that. But on the other hand, we are a scientific institute, so we cannot shut down our activity altogether. We have research here which is geared towards finding, in the longer term, solutions for viral diseases as well as corona. In the nearer term, we're trying to help the Israeli government to find ways to accelerate the pace with which corona tests are being carried out. And even, I mean, not less importantly, as a scientific institution, we have the duty to explain this medical situation, to explain it scientifically, because we believe that information helps people understand the situation and therefore fear it less and think about it in rational terms. So in this context, it is my pleasure introducing Professor Gabi Barbasah. Gabi has a long history of being an administrator within the Israeli health system. Gabi was the Director General of the Ministry of Health in Israel, and in parallel for many years he was also the CEO of the Sikorsky Medical Center, the biggest hospital in Tel Aviv. I asked Gabi before, how come you can do two such incredibly demanding tasks in parallel? Gabi said, it's not a problem. Gabi is also an active scientist. He published more than 80 publications. And since 2015, we have the pleasure of having Gabi here at the Weizmann Institute, where he's heading the Bench to Bedside Center. So I think there are very few people, if any, who understand the health system in Israel in depth. As such, Gabi is a frequent visitor to news news television broadcasts these days in Israel. So he's seen frequently on the screen, and now we have the pleasure of Gabi explaining the corona situation to us and to you.
So welcome to this video conference, which represents the new social gathering of in the days of corona. And what I'd like to do today with you is to share with you my understanding, knowledge of this new virus disease. And what we will do, I will cover with you the characteristics of the disease, how can we fight it, what happened in Israel, what happened in other countries, and very carefully, what is the prediction for the future. So let's start with the characteristics of the disease. I have to reserve my next fact that I'm going to share with you, that we are living in a very unpredictable course of disease. We do not really know all the facts about the virus. We are trying to gather information from countries that experience the corona disease, but what we know is limited, and we have to be very careful when we try to predict based on what we know. What do we know about the virus? We know that this virus is very infective. If you compare, for example, the infectivity rate of seasonal flu, we are talking about probably 10% of the population that is infected by the seasonal flu every year. If you listen to Angela Merkel 3 days ago, she was citing the numbers of 60 to 70% of the population. That is, if we allow the virus to be distributed in the population, eventually we are going to see 60 to 70% of the population infected by the virus, and this is due to the high infectivity rate of this virus.
Join the meeting.
Anyone interferes? No? Okay, that is one characteristic of the virus. And you know, when we are evaluating the damage that any bacteria or virus can do, we are measuring two characteristics. One is the infectivity, and the other one is what we call case fatality rate. What is the aggressiveness of the virus? How much damage does it cause disease-wise and mortality-wise? Now, this is clearly an area where we do not know exactly what is the fatality rate of the virus. If you look on what happened in China, in the Wuhan area or Hubei area, the mortality rate was around 4.3, 4.5%. But interestingly, when you look on the mortality rate in China, in other districts of China, the mortality rate there is 0.7%. How come there is such a big difference between what happened in Hubei and other parts of China? There are two possible explanations to that. One is that the higher mortality rate, you see the higher mortality rate when you have the virus meet unprepared healthcare system. And when you have the healthcare system prepared and you slow the distribution of the virus in the society, in the population, you see less in mortality rates. That is one explanation that is very reassuring. On the other hand, a few days ago, there was a paper that was published from one of the biology departments in China that mentioned or found that there are two strains of the virus. One strain that was more prevalent in Wuhan area with higher mortality, and the other strain that was in the other parts of China with lower mortality. So we really do not know whether this is really the lower rate of mortality in the other parts of China does represent better preparedness of the healthcare system, or is it related to the second trait, lower mortality trait of the virus? Having said that, I want to draw your attention to the mortality rate in Italy. Italy is, in a way, experiencing the same situation that was in Wuhan, only with one different big difference. The Italians are less disciplined or can be less controlled as compared to China, and they do what they want. They come and go from areas, they flee from area with disease. But anyway, the mortality rate in Italy is about 5%. And as a side remark, I must say that this is a medical holocaust. Amazing that it can happen in a Western country with relatively very good healthcare system. And this kind of, it's like a threat that is in front of our eyes whenever we try to plan how to deal with the virus. So I was saying that the infectivity rate is very high. The mortality rate may be low, may be high, depending on the healthcare system and maybe the strain of the virus. But there are few more characteristics which are very important. The next one I want to mention is that there is a very big portion of patients that are infected, are infecting others, but they suffer nothing. They either do not know they have a disease or they have a very mild disease. I'm talking about 50 to 60% of the patients that are infected that are asymptomatic. And the pattern of penetrance of the virus into the society is based on this huge population of people who are infected. They do not know anything about that. They live in the community, and the virus kind of boils under the radar of the healthcare system, and at a certain point in time, it bursts open like, you know, the horror films, and becomes evident with huge numbers of clinical patients that are suffering from severe disease. This asymptomatic group of patients is one of the reasons why this virus is so infective and why it is so threatening the healthcare system and the health of every one of us. To sum it up, 80% of the patients that are going to be infected by the coronavirus are going to have either none or very mild disease. 15% are going to have more severe disease. 4% would necessitate intensive care unit, and some of them also ventilation, artificial ventilation. And out of this 4%, 5% would come the patients that are going to die. Now, it should be noted that the virus, the mortality rates and the severeness of the disease is age dependent. 60% of the mortality of the patient with the virus are among patients who are 60 and 70 years old. Children are infected, can transmit the disease, but they do not have a disease, severe disease. They usually do not need any hospitalization, nothing at all. To cover this and to close these characteristics, we suspect that pregnant women are also in additional risk, because we know that pregnant women are with a higher risk to be infected with other coronaviruses. But we do not have enough experience about pregnant women. There is, 2 days ago, there was a paper that proven that in 9 pregnant women that were infected by the virus did not transfer the virus to their embryos.
Fetus.
Yeah, fetus. Yeah. So this is the description of the characteristic of the virus. Now, what can we do to combat, to fight the virus? First of all, the obvious answer is vaccination. There are a lot of efforts done with the effort to minimize the time frame of the preparations and authorization of viruses, but you shouldn't expect a vaccination before a year from the first day, like the end of this year. And even then, remember, there is a whole world population that is waiting for this vaccine, and it will be difficult to produce and supply the vaccine to all people in the world. Maybe we'll have more than one company that will do that. Currently, there are many clinical trials in China and in the US that are using HIV medications in an effort to deal with the coronavirus. There are not yet results of these trials, but for example, in Israel, there was a very severely ill patient, an Arab patient from East Jerusalem that was driving a religious group that came to visit Israel from Greece and was infected from them. And he was just popped into the emergency room in one of the hospitals in the north with severe pneumonia. He was ventilated for a few days and got two medications. One is an HIV medication, and the other one is, by surprise, chloroquine, which is an anti-malaria medication that change the acidity of the cells, and by this kind of prevent propagation or proliferation of the virus. And this guy, I don't know if it is because of the natural course of the disease in his case, that he was treated well by ventilation and so on, or because of the medication that he received, he is recuperating now. So this is the second, I was talking about vaccination, now medication. But here I come to the most prevalent method that we have, and that is isolation. The only way that we can prevent distribution of the virus in the population is by isolation of the population. And if we go now to the graph that we have prepared, I will explain what is the theory behind it. Can we put it on the screen? Yes. This is a nice graph that was prepared by the New York Times. And on the left, the y-axis, you have the number of coronavirus cases. And on the x-axis, you have the time since the first case. If you look on the red curve, this is the usual distribution of the virus without any protective measures. This is how the virus is going to behave. A very large number of patients with a very short time. On the right side, you see what happens when you imply isolation methods and prolong the time that the virus is spreading in the population. Here you see that graph, the blue graph. It is not necessarily that the number of patients in the blue graph, under the curve of the blue graph, is different from the number of patients in the red graph. They may be the same, but in the blue graph, when you do protective measures and you isolate the population, you prolong the time during which you have the patient coming to the healthcare system. And the line that you see above the blue graph represents the capacity of the healthcare system. So if the capacity of the healthcare system in that graph, and you are able to prolong the time that the patient evolve and are coming openly to the field, not those who are asymptomatics, but those who come to be evident to the healthcare system, you allow the healthcare system to meet them within the capacity of the healthcare system, which doesn't happen if those are coming in a huge mass like it happened in Wuhan. This is the red graph represents exactly what happened in Wuhan and what is happening today in Italy, where they have to deny ventilation from patients that necessitate ventilation. So this, in a way, this graph, in a way, represents the rationale for the isolation methodology, where you separate, you do social distancing, you allow patients, you allow citizens, you do not allow citizens to associate, you don't have any theater meetings, anything, nothing at all. And this is exactly what we are going to do now in Israel. And I'll explain in a minute what happened in Israel. We can leave that graph out. So what happened in Israel? When we realized what is happening with the virus in China, the first step was to block all flights coming from China, and this blockage of incoming flights distributed, expanded to other countries as other countries became infected. And we knew that they are having more and more patients there. And so slowly but surely, Israel became isolated. And today, it is isolated from almost all of the world. And by the way, these measures are being taken also by other countries, even though it is later. So now, this is what we are now at the end of this stage, trying to isolate Israel from incoming flights from other places that are infected. And at the same time, Israel employed a very strict epidemiological investigation on each and every patient that came with the symptoms, trying to find out his contacts and so on. So, as a matter of fact, what we did, we took all the passengers that came from countries that are infected and put them on isolation and followed them for 2 weeks. And when some of them became infected, we went to their passengers that came with them with the airplane, and we reached all their contacts. And out of the, let's say, 200 patients that we have now in Israel, we know, except for 1 or 2, we know exactly where they caught the virus, or there are two groups. One that brought the virus from abroad, and we know each and every one of them, who is he, where he came from, where he got the virus. And the other group is those contacts of those first invaders. And we know every contact that came with them or was associated with them in the flight or when they came into Israel and before they went into isolation. So except for 2 patients that we still look for their source of infection, we know all of the patients in Israel where they got the infection. And that is very important because it tells you that you are in control of the infectivity in Israel. Having said that, I must say very clearly, we know that there are more patients in Israel. We know that. We don't know who they are, but we know that. And that is why we are now going from what we call the containment phase of the fight against the virus, which was flights and epidemiological investigation to try to understand who is who and why is he who. And we are going to the mitigation phase of the fight. And that means that we are now employing this week an isolation on the citizens of Israel who are requested to stay home, don't go out. We can go with your dog to pee. You can go to the supermarket once a day, but that's it. You have to stay home. And this is huge decision that shut down the industry in Israel, the economy of Israel, and it's going to go on like that until the end of Passover. During that time that we are going to shut off Israel, we are going to start doing environmental or investigation of the community, doing random examinations for corona in the community to get a picture, a map of the coronavirus in the population, even the population that is not symptomatic, so that we can have kind of clues what's happening in the underground of the population. And that would help us when we come to the end of Passover to decide if there are areas that are more prone to develop the disease, less prone to develop. We will have better picture. Currently, this curfew is going to go on until the end of Passover, but we are ready that if the situation, if the curve that we have now that is growing every day, and as Roy mentioned to me now, double every 3 days, double every 3 days. It's a geometrical curve. If the curve does not bend and respond to our measures, we will have to continue and even do more, although I'm not sure. Now, we have to, I'm almost finished. I want to say a few words about what's happening. I talked about Wuhan and the rest of China. There are countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, that or Taiwan, they were very successful in controlling the epidemic of the coronavirus. And most of them did the same thing, tracing, blocking blocking flights from other sites, and those who come are in isolation, and some isolation measures in the population. All of them did that. Some of them even introduced some electronic measures of controlling or following patients or contact of patients. What happened in Italy, and I'll say it very carefully, I think that Italy decided on the fate of the whole Europe continent. There is no way, when you have one country like that have no borders between the states in the European continent, there is no way to block the spread of the virus. And what you see now in Spain, which is the next after Italy, what you see what's happening in France, what you see what's happening in Germany, although I have to comment, in Germany you see low rate of mortality, and that is because Germany is conducting wide range screening for corona in the population, so they find more corona patients, which is not done in France or Italy or Spain. So the numbers there are higher, and therefore the mortality, based on the numbers that they collect or discover, is lower. What's happening in Spain, in Britain, is frightening and interesting. Britain has decided that they are taking another policy. They say, we are expecting, we know that the virus is going to spread in the population. We expect the spread to reach 60-70%. We will let it spread. We will defend, protect the higher risk population of the 60-70 years old. And this way we will have higher population that is infected and is immune. And we will have what we call the herd immunity that protect the population from the virus. Will they succeed in doing so without inflicting mortality on the predisposed population in England? It is interesting to see. Some define it as the biggest human experiment ever. My projection for the future, I have to cite someone in the American Senate that said that what happened with the coronavirus pandemic or the coronavirus pandemic is going to be part of the lexicon of 9/11 and other disasters that we have seen in our life or before our life. And that is because our life are not going to be the same, at least for the next year, and maybe later. This virus is not going to go. It's going to stay. And it will take a year. And we have to know that pandemics are known to behave in waves. So we can expect maybe some are expecting to see slowing down of the virus distribution during the summer. That is based on some experience with the SARS. Nobody really knows. And I can't say that this is going to happen, but it may happen. But if it is going to happen, we have to expect it to rise its head again in the winter. Hopefully by the winter we may have vaccination. But this is something that we are going to live with for a long time. And after that year, when we maybe have a higher proportion of the population that has an immune against the virus, maybe this is going to subside. Before you ask, I'll tell you that the immunity that people who are infected are getting against the virus is usually no longer than 3-4 years. So maybe our children are going to meet that virus again in a few years from now. This is what I want to tell you. I want to end by saying, I know that the average age of the people who are listening to me is in the 60 years, maybe 60 years region of the high-risk population. What we recommend here is that those who are in a high risk for being infected should limit their exposure, limit their social exposure, and adopt very strict hygiene behavior. That is the only thing that we can recommend. Avoid meeting people, especially people who may carry the virus, of course. So I hope this was in a way beneficial to you. I'm sorry I can't tell you that you are like the young kids that are going to have this mild disease. This is not the case in our case, mine too. And we have to be aware of it and prepare for that.
Thank you, Gabi. We have a few questions
Sure.
From the listeners. So first of all, Mario Fleck is asking, is there any way of increasing our body resistance to the virus?
Not that I know. Be sure. I mean, not that I know about it. No.
Okay.
I'll just add, some people were asking, we can inject patients with IVIG, which is antibodies, that we can supplement antibodies. But unless these antibodies include already antibodies from patients or wherever you got the antibodies from that met the virus before, this is not going to help. You need antibodies that are directed against that virus. So we have to wait for the vaccination.
Thank you. Second question from Eduardo Spitzer. Two questions, actually. What methods are in place for detection? Real-time PCR or immunological methods like ELISA?
Hold on. So the method that we are using all over the world is PCR. We take the virus, we take the sample, we enhance the sample, and then put it into a PCR. And it takes about 6 hours to get the answer from the time the sample arrived in the laboratory till you get the answer. I'm mentioning it the 6 hours because it's very difficult to rely on that when you deal with a patient that, let's say, that came into the emergency room. Let's say that you suspect that his pneumonia is related to the virus. You have to treat him as a suspected corona for almost a day before you clear whether he is coronavirus or not. So it's very difficult. I know that there are efforts to develop a much faster test. Again, when they develop it, it's probably going to be about an hour or two, not less than that.
Okay, second question. Besides HIV or chloroquine drugs, is there any use of serum from recovered patients to treat ill patients?
Very good question. They are examining it now, trying to elicit those antibodies that I'm talking about from patients that recovered, but it's a long way.
From Vanessa, does the heat slow down the propagation of the virus? Is there any evidence?
No evidence, hopes.
Okay, how is going to be the situation in India and Africa, where the healthcare situation is even worse?
One of our biggest fears is what happens if this is distributed in India. And I must tell you, our backdoor, the Palestinian Authority. You have the high condensed population. The system is not very, I would say, the healthcare system is not very efficient. And these are areas where we are afraid that the virus will penetrate. We are working, by the way, very closely with the Palestinian Authority, which are doing great work to minimize the spread. But, you know, something I was saying in the beginning of my discussion, that there are many things with the virus that we do not really understand yet. And part of it is the world distribution of the virus. If you look on what's happening in Australia, for example, or Thailand, for example, there is a minimum distribution of the virus. We do not know if it is related to the weather, or we really don't understand that yet. So there are many questions that when we have the answer, we will know better how to cope with it or prepare for it in the future.
If you have high blood pressure, is the infection more dangerous?
The comorbidities, the diseases that patients have, has implication on the risk of severe disease or even mortality. The two most important maladies that are related with high risk for the virus are chronic lung diseases, especially with smokers, and oncological patients with decreased immune system. These are the two main conditions that are associated with higher severity and mortality. But having said that, the clinical reports that are coming from China and from Italy and from everywhere, when you look on the list, there is also cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, all are included in the list, but not as the immune response, the immune decompensated system, and the lung disease.
What can you say about USA, or maybe Latin America, if you?
I think it is, I can express my feeling with one word. It is amazing to see what's happening in the US. To see a very developed country with highly developed and heavily invested healthcare system, almost 20% of the GDP, allow such a distribution all over the continent. I have no explanation for that.
How soon should a country start isolation? Does isolation mean stay at home?
Yeah, isolation means stay at home, and you have to do that before you reach a very significant distribution of the virus, not with imported patients, but with inter-community distribution. When you have this very small, that is the time to fight. You have, with this virus, you have to take action before the virus. If you wait and you let the virus reach ahead of you, you lost the trial, you lost the fight.
What do you believe should be the growth rate that we need to target to avoid stress in the health system? And does it make sense to us in Brazil, for example, to apply a self-quarantine to the family, even with no signs?
Even with?
With no signs.
No?
With
no what?
Symptoms. No, I guess he means symptoms. Yeah.
So I don't understand the question.
האם צריכים להיכנס לבידוד אפילו שאין...
I don't think, no. Look, there is no reason to go into isolation for a year now. I mean, I don't know what happened, what will happen with the divorce rate later on. So I think that you need to look at what's happening in the population, and if there is an increase in the virus, and also I have to mention something else. I'm not familiar with the healthcare system in each and every country in the Latin America, and how prudent are they in screening the population or identifying that there is a burst of the virus. So it depends on each country, but if I'm safe that the country is going to earnestly explore this and be prepared for that and monitor what's happening, then I wouldn't go into isolation before there is higher numbers of patients in that country. But again, it depends on the healthcare system in the country and how prudent are they in identifying such a development.
The people who got the virus, are they immune after they?
Yeah, I mentioned that after they got the virus, they are immune for 3 to 4 years.
I'm not sure I understand. What about herd immunity?
Herd immunity? They want to know what is herd immunity?
Yeah.
Herd immunity means, when I mentioned herd immunity, herd is like flock of sheep and so on, and it means that you have, for example, if you want to prevent measles in the population, you need to reach a certain level of people in the population that are immune against measles. And when you have that proportion of people in the population that are immune, that is herd immunity, then even if you have one patient, the herd is immune and one patient will not infect others. So you need a certain level of people who are insured in the population, who are immune in the population, in order to prevent, even if there is one case, to prevent spread in the community. And this is the explanation behind the policy of Britain. They say, we are going to have 50% of the population infected and immune for 3-4 years. And then, even if we have one patient, he will not be able to infect the whole population because he will meet the wall of the herd immunity. I hope it is clear.
And last question, I believe. They want you to explain in more detail social isolation because this is the only thing that they can do. For instance, also to meet the grandparents or not to meet the grandparents.
I mean, when we talked about social isolation or social distancing means do not go or cancel all public events. And for example, we recommended this Saturday, we recommended that social distancing would include only up to 10 persons in one place. No more than 10 persons and 10 people. And we have recommended, although we cannot force this, that grandparents are not going to visit or do babysitting to their grandchildren because they are prone to be infected. Children may be carrying that without even knowing that they are sick. And we really want to preserve or to defend this group of people who are prone to be infected and have a severe disease. So we say, stay home, ask people to supply you with supplies, don't go out for a month, and wait until we let you go out. On the other hand, those who can, we recommend or we tell them, you can go out for 10 minutes twice or once a day, enjoy the sun or the park, and go home without using the elevator or using the elevator on your own without anyone else. This is really serious. We treat this virus very serious because when you combine the infectivity capability of that virus with the mortality that is associated with it, even if it is 1%, and you talk about 30% of the population infected, think what it is 1% of 30% of your population. What numbers are there? And if you even leave out the mortality and you talk about the 4 or 5% of patients that need intensive care unit, there is no Western society that have enough such number of beds to meet the demand that 30% infectivity of the population with 4% of death are going to meet the healthcare facility.
Okay, so now we want to ask the last question, and it will be also for Roy. Roy, if you can enter onto the frame. The question is the world of science and medicine united at this time in studying and looking for solutions? Is the Weizmann Institute involved?
I'll tell you, I know about one big issue that the Weizmann Institute is involved, and that is helping increase the number of tests, corona tests in the population in Israel, and significantly increasing the volume of tests that are going to be done. I want to add one more thing, just to keep the picture, complete. There are discussions in Israel and also in the world about whether it is worthwhile to do these efforts of shutting down the industry, the economy, in the effort to avoid the virus distribution. Because the argument is that this shutdown has huge implication on the life of many small businesses, big businesses, and so on. And can you really wait? What is the benefit? I mean, is the benefit of shutting down the economy worthwhile with the life that people are losing, maybe all of their life efforts? And this is an ethical issue. Israel and Jewish tradition always mention life as the most important value to defend, but I must say that, you know, sitting in the medical side of the decision making and seeing the big damage that is caused to the economy and to many people that their life project is destroyed. You know, this is really huge and difficult decision to make. And I really pray that we made the right decision. Britain will prove.
Okay, Roy.
Well, I think that the scientific world and the medical world are connected even during normal times, deeply connected. I think that if you look at the tree of technology and medication and knowledge, science is the roots, and the doctors that go to hospitals are the leaves. I think that every tree needs strong roots. And I think that if you look specifically at the coronavirus, again, there are different time scales. As Gabi mentioned, the probably most significant effect that we can have as a scientific institution in the short term is to combine the national effort and increase significantly the volume of corona tests in Israel. But if you look at the intermediate and the long term, then research that is done at the Institute is certainly geared towards understanding viral infectious diseases better, geared towards finding immunity, vaccines, and also geared towards finding the dynamics, the way the virus proliferates through the population. So I think our involvement as a scientific institution goes through all levels and through all time scales, and we certainly are hoping and are geared to make an impact, both in the short and the long term.
And my last note is that I want to thank you for honoring me to speak with you today. So thank you.